In 2009, at the height of the national housing crisis, he packed up his belongings and moved from his hometown of Detroit to Chicago to accept the newly created vice president role with the largest Girl Scouts council in the world. 2 years later, he became Chief Development and Marketing Officer for Youth Guidance, where he led work resulting in the exponential growth of the organization's Becoming a Man Youth Development and Violence Prevention Program. He continued on to complete 2 successful stints at Chicago Urban League, starting as VP and Chief Development Officer, and ultimately becoming EVP and COO. During his tenures, the organization achieved its most successful fundraising year in its then 100-year history. A graduate of the University of Michigan, he's the Essence best-selling author of the novels 5 Dimes and Devilicious, and the anthology Mad Love. He's also the proud papa to his 2 fur babies, Jujubee and Charlie Brown. Please join me and author, television host, nonprofit leader, and my former student, Darrious Hilmon, in the arena right now.
Here we go!
Darrious.
Miss Thompson! I'm never going to call you Deborah. Miss Thompson, oh my gosh.
So good to be here with you. I'm so proud of you. I want to know some things about you that I never knew when I was your teacher. So, and maybe other people don't know. I know this one.
Okay.
But tell them, where did you grow up? And how did that place influence who you are today?
I was born on July 31st, 1968 at 4:20 in the afternoon at Detroit Memorial Hospital, which no longer exists. And my mom was literally going in for her final, I was supposed to come in August. She was going in for her final checkup and they went, he's coming. And that afternoon they took her to the hospital and I was born. And we grew up, my mom, my dad were married. I was the 3rd baby. And we were steps. So my oldest brother, 18 months later, my late brother Leonard, 16 months later, me. So grew up on the east side of Detroit, a wood frame home. Didn't even know that cement homes existed. It was a unique experience. I did not realize just how poor we were until my first year at U of M. When young students were coming in, my friends from New York, getting their credit cards from their parents and coming to me going, let's break the credit card in. And I went, what is this magical thing you all are talking about?
So, did you go to your neighborhood public schools then?
God, yes, always. Jones Elementary. And I think today my parents would have gotten arrested because it was just at the tail end of our district. So we walked busy streets. You know the neighborhoods. We walked through Van Dyke, all the way over, near Kirchville on the east side of Detroit, a good 1.5 miles. But we walked it after kindergarten. We walked it, but it was a different time. Then we went to Burroughs. There was Barbara, and we were literally on Van Dyke. So my best friend Kelvin, because he was a block over on Parker, our relationship ended because he had to go to Barbara, and I had to go again to the end of our district to Burroughs. And then high school, between Burroughs and my home, was Kettering.
And that's where I met you.
And that's where we met.
But you were always like one step ahead. I know you were even born one step ahead, and you stayed one step ahead. So when did you graduate from high school and how old were you?
I think I just turned 16 when I graduated. And because we had a strike that year, school ran late. And because I was in the bridge program, because they weren't sure I was socialized enough, they made me come in the summer. So it was about a week between walking across the stage, hugging you and others, and going to U of M.
Wow. So you just alluded a few minutes ago to what it was like to go to U of M from the east side of Detroit. Can you talk about how you managed that? Because I know several students who didn't manage that and ended up coming home.
You know, I think taking a step back, I remember my first week at Kettering. And I chose to go to the neighborhood school versus the two sort of magnet schools, Renaissance and Cass, because I'd already started becoming a strategist. You know my brothers, and they had built their reputation. The day I was there, my sister at the time, I remember in the band class, she flipped one of the football players, and they were like, "Yeah, you get it." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm safer here." But I also realized strategically, I had to be walking out of the building when the last one of them did. So it became strategy very early on. So I was very clear, and I didn't know what U of M would be exactly, but I knew from reading books, when my fourth grade teacher brought books to my house, that there was a world outside the one I lived in. And something in me was sloppy will, something said, get through high school. High school became a strategy. I took two of your classes, I think, in 11th and 12th grade class in the same session because I was just, and you all supported me on that. You were like, are you sure you know what you're doing? And you trusted that I did it. But I became very strategic, and U of M for me was the world I read in books. It was the opportunity to have conversations with Jewish people who I'd never met from New York. Michigan has a large contingent of New Yorkers. To meet Kishi, I think was her name, from here, Chicago, and to sit at 2 a.m, have conversations. Studies were always fairly easy for me. So being in this world where I got to decide when I got up, I liked the structure of it, and I liked the freedom of it, and it's what I always craved in Detroit. So I liked it. It suited me, but it was always a means to an end. I knew it wasn't the final stop. I needed that piece of paper to be able to do what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I didn't know what that was yet, but I knew I needed that paper.
So I'm curious as to how you became such a strategic thinker at such a young age. I think that's pretty unusual.
I think growing up in crises, you know, I love my family. I always felt love in our house, but my mother and father married very young. They were barely 20. And they began having a family very quickly. And my father, I believe my late father, he was a beautiful man, exquisite. My mom's gorgeous, still at 80. But he was a beautiful man, and the world put on top of him certain expectations based on really striking good looks. Where things that he should have been held accountable for, he wasn't. And things that he should have been allowed to believe possible for him, he wasn't. So my father had struggles with alcoholism for most of his life that I knew him. There was violence in the home. And I think at 8 years old, I remember my mom brought us all together, and she said, we have to start thinking as a family. I am considering ending the marriage with your father. And they had been separated. And we took a vote. And my vote was yes, this is why you need to do it. We need to do this. We need to move forward. At 8 years old, I became very strategic. I love him, but the right choice for you, for this family, is to do this. And living in a home, and I still have it to this day at 55, I don't like loud noises in my personal space because that always, it still triggers. And I say this to say, at 55, I also know that my beautiful, funny, incredibly talented father taught me my love of words. He taught me my love of strategy and thinking. He was a brilliant man. And he just some his own doing, some the world we live in. I just don't think he was given a fair shake. But he left us with such great things, but also some damage that is our job as adults to work through. But that's where it came from. It was in a house where I went, how do I, even a child, support my mom, support us, help in my own way to keep us safe? How do we move through this? How do I, at 8 years old, have a voice and go, okay, can we just consider doing this? Can we? So in some ways, that's where it all began. How do you get from point A to point B with as little harm as possible, or as efficient as possible? And my little 8-year-old brain started processing things that way.
Yeah, well, as a child, you had to do things that a lot of children don't have to do. So you had a lot to consider. So did you work when you were in high school, or what was your first meaningful job?
That's interesting. My siblings worked. We had a Burger King in our midst, a McDonald's, because my brother would bring home, McDonald's, big old bags of those nuggets.
Chicken McNuggets?
Like big plastic bags from the freezer, and we would deep fry them. They were delicious. I didn't have to work because even then, my mom said to us always, college is not, you don't have to do college, but you must be working. For me, in that regard, I did have a different experience where it was I could choose to work because my grades were good, and they even though we couldn't quite know what college was yet, they knew I was on a different path, and they sort of supported that in their own way. So my first job, one of my first paid jobs, was Miss Handelman, my other favorite teacher. Work study in her class. So I was in her honors class in the morning, and then in the afternoon, part of my job in my work study was to help grade papers, but to also keep the football players in the front row awake. I'm not joking. I would go, hey, come on, man, wake up. That was my first job. And then I would leave school and go over to Channel 56, the public television station, where I was an unpaid intern on Detroit's Black Journal. So I would take the tube, get on the Warren, the Van Dyke, take it to Warren, take it across town. That was it. Miss Handelman paid. I bought my first Calvin Klein blue jean jacket with a check from my work study check from Miss Handelman. That was it.
That's a great story. So, all of that being said, you're back at Channel 56. Yeah. How did you end up deciding to pack up everything and take the move from Detroit, where it was probably pretty comfortable for you? It's a city you really knew, and move to Chicago when there was a lot going on economically here that would make it very difficult.
And we thought GM was going under at the time. Well, that's how crazy the world was.
Yeah.
It was, I'll go back 2 years. It was, again, there are silver linings in even the darkest moments. 2 years earlier, in 2007, on Thanksgiving, my brother had a heart attack and died at 40 years old. And I mean this. I remember being in my apartment, Lafayette Plaisance, over there in that neighborhood near downtown. And I was in the bathroom, and a wave of sadness came over me. And my brother and I, full disclaimer, we had been estranged the entire year. So on that day, we saw each other for a half second and immediately went our separate ways when I walked into my mom's home. But that evening, I had this overwhelming sense of deep sorrow, and I just cried. Don't know why. I was thinking maybe it's just the stress of everything going on. Maybe an hour later, my cell phone was going off. This is when we still had landlines. The doorman of my building was knocking on my doors about midnight. And I still remember the sound when I finally checked messages of again, my issue with sounds. The pain in my mother's scream. And my brother had passed. And while I have no regrets, it was one of those hard lessons where sometimes to save yourself, you've got to break from others. And then 2 years later, I still remember what it felt like. the person who I would sleep on the sofa with the night before school. Because we were 16 months apart. So instead of our bedrooms, we get on the sofa getting ready for school, picking out our clothes. And now that this man, who was brilliant, I think in so many ways smarter than me, his life was over at 40. So 2 years later, when we were in the midst of all this, I said, it's so fleeting. If it doesn't work, you can always come back. But remember how you felt when you saw your brother. It's over. There's no second chances. So it was part of the experience of the loss that made me say, take the risk. So literally at the height of the housing crisis, I came here 14 years ago, no regrets. But that was one of his beautiful legacies to me. I think it was from beyond where he went, go, take the chance, don't regret anything.
What a gift to you.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I think in my first book, in my acknowledgments, I mention him, and I say in the book, no one can make me laugh harder or cry harder than you do. And that was it. He loved me deeply, but again, we are all interconnected, especially families, and through malice or not, harm is caused, and hurt people, and I know my brother loved me deeply, but there was deep hurt there. And as you get older and you do your own work, I can reconcile. When I needed him the most, he was there. There were some dark moments that we never talked about, that my brother was the one who went, come, I got you, let's take care of this. No judgment, So that is part of his legacy, but part of my being here right now is because of him. Part of my love of writing and words is because of my daddy. Mm-hmm. And they both look alike. They were both spectacular, beautiful, smart, maybe charming, too much for their own sake. Mm-hmm. But and I have some of that in me. So they lived through me in some ways.
So here you are, you come into Chicago, and in the intro we talked about some of your jobs that you had here. Yeah. Quite a history here. And so, and now you're here, the executive director of CAN TV. It's a 5-station community access television network. How did that happen?
Makes no sense. One, Chicago has been incredibly kind to me. I have made some relationships here that have been so much more than transactional. And to have come here with no family or friends in the city, to have folks wrap around me and still to this day wrap around. My coming here makes no logical sense. I suspect, as wonderful as I might be at my job, or I try to be really good at it, had we not been 2 pandemics in, had the world of funding and revenue for public access stations like CAN TV had not changed, I would not have been looked at for this job. So I'm not here, I believe, because people wanted me. I'm here because it's happened a lot in my career, because people needed me. And that's fine, that's great, that's wonderful. But what that frees me up to do is to just do it for the right reasons. Do what I know, do it with grace, be humane, understand that in change environments where change is absolutely necessary, sometimes accountability in the absence of it feels oppressive.
That's great.
Yeah, so that's where we are here.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. One last question. You speak openly about seeing a therapist. Why do you think it's important that you share that with others?
I think we've been talking about it during this conversation. Hurt people hurt people. We are, especially within the Black community, with Baptist Church, with, I grew up in a family where we would have a special uncle, but he's just that way. We protect him. We don't really address the issue. We just kind of look the other way. We deal with it. So in the Black community, but in all communities, mental wellness is as important as your physical wellness. And I am an ardent proponent of try Jesus and therapy. And in the world where we find ourselves right now, where there is such vitriol, such pain, such anger, I think without doing that work, people do the wrong things for the right reasons. That still makes it wrong. If you are past the age of probably 10, you have lived enough trauma, you have experienced enough complexity, where to try to unpack that alone, when there are supports in place, just seems less efficient for me. And being in therapy this route for the past 6 years, I cannot imagine surviving this past year in this incredible role, but I certainly cannot imagine having survived the past 4 years without therapy and the ability to hand it to someone who doesn't love me, hand it to someone who doesn't feel the pain as deeply as I do, which colors how they help me support it, to be able to process so that I don't become a hurt person who hurts people, that I can, there's so much happening in the world. That's why I talk about it every opportunity. It is important, but it is also an incredible gift to give to yourself, but others, because hurt people hurt people. And at some point it stops being what my dad did, what my mom may or may not have done, what an uncle did, what a cousin did. And I have to now take ownership of my own happiness, my own well-being. And therapy allows me to do that.
And how about your little dogs?
Oh, they are there. Listen, look how they are my road dogs. They have their own personalities. I grew up in the house, we talked about this. I grew up in the house growing up where, because of my dad, we had birds, rabbits, at least 3 or 4 or 5 dogs. They were all in the house. They are empaths. They love me no matter what I'm wearing. They don't care if I'm 25 pounds heavier than I was. They don't care if I'm working or not working, if I have the shiniest car or not. They just love me. And they also make me stop because they sense your energy. So they make me stop and ask myself, what are you putting out? Because they're responding to it. And my mom said something to my younger sister, and I would have been offended if it weren't true. She said to my younger sister, Javaki, who's 13 years younger than me, she said, you should consider getting a dog. And my sister said, why? She's like, because it's made your brother, having one, such a nicer person. And again, I was like, and my mom, when she told me, she said, I told your sister. And I was like, and I was like, oh, it's true though. I can't be mad. It's true, but that's why I have them, and they are the best companions, and they love me unconditionally. Their little tails, every time they see me, I know that some human in the world loves me without question.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. It's so great to reconnect with you, and we've been connecting for a long time now.
You have kept an eye on you, and again, I know I'm not supposed to do this because it's you're the interviewer, but what you have meant to my life, and this is why there are through lines in my life about education, and supporting not just student scholars but educators. What you and Nancy Handelman and a few others whose name I will forget or not mention today, you all show me not performative respect, but you all believed in me sometimes when I didn't even know to yet. You all supported me in a way that not, oh, that's out of your reach. It was, I remember your class. It was, and I remember when I got to U of M, I'm like, Miss Thompson's English class was like a lecture hall. And it was a weird room in Kettering High School. It's the only one of its type where it was lecture hall. And I remember sitting here, Kimberly in front of me, you at the desk, dark, stark brunette, young. But I remember you said to the class once, hey everyone, I want to honor something. Darrious got his first acceptance and it's only October of senior year. So everybody come on, get on it. And I was like, oh, Oh, because I wouldn't have had that conversation at home. My mom, they were great, but you were like, he's doing it. And I remember you taking me to one or a few oratorical contests.
Yep.
On the weekend, picking me up if I needed the vest or a little tie. And it was those things that you did not to show and tell, but that you were part of my village. If you never know this and no one else gives you your flowers, but I know they do, I owe you so much. So being in your presence is such a joy to me. I was a messy little baby.
Aw.
I was a messy little
I
baby
think
and you
you're
loved
good.
me. I appreciate it.
What's up, Chicago? I'm Darius Caffey, and I invite you to join me for a new episode of The Table on Air with co-owner of Nobody's Darling Bar in Andersonville, Renata Riddle.
The space that we created was for the person that was in the mirror, right?
Join the conversation with us on Tuesday, November 28th at 7:30 p.m. on CanTV Cable Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org, and available on the CanTV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
Our final segment, Darius. 3 for the road. If you could have dinner with any person, living or deceased, besides me, of course.
Of course. But we
Who
did
would
that
you
last
choose
night.
and why?
Right now, Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton. I go through these waves of being reminded how much I respect and love that woman. And she was one of the women, she and Diane Carroll in our house growing up, that my mom had a special affinity for. And there was something about Dolly's pride and her, what she called it trashiness, but her coat of many colors. There was just a connection. We had such respect and adoration for her in our house. And I just watched an interview with her and the CBS News anchor recently. And she is just kind and smart, and you don't last in an industry that can be so transient as long as she does. And she is who she is, but at the core of it, she's kind. And I would love to sit with Dolly. I'd love to play in Dolly's closet, first of all, but to listen to her, she's a kind, gentle, talented human being, and I would love to spend time with her and just have a conversation over dinner.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All the work she does with literacy is
Yes.
amazing. So, now the tough one. Have any regrets?
No. I've played that game in my mind. I don't believe in luck and happenstance. I believe in divine order. And I've played the game of trying to pull one thread of something that was either very painful and it changes everything else. So my fear is to have regrets that take up space. Then there's a chance I wouldn't be here or have the experiences I've had. So even with all of the pain, even with bad choices, I don't believe in right and wrong choices and consequences. I stand behind my choices.
So what would you give then as advice?
I would say to myself, breathe. Breathe. And just trust fully that you are more, and I mean this, that you are more than enough. Just trust it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
you.
So much.
Thank you,
So
Ms.
good to be
Thompson, for
with you.
everything. Good to be with you as well.
So proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
Darius,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you again for joining me in the arena tonight. And thank you, Chicago and beyond, for tuning in. Let me leave you with a final thought for the road, courtesy of Walter Elliott. Perseverance is not a long race. It is many short races, one after the other. Until we meet again, take good care of you and each other. Good night.